I think that being very creative in the headline can be a recipe for disaster because it generally makes the press release longer and more playful and requires more hoops for the journalist quick browsing mind to jump through and figure out before they move on.
So in terms of the uniqueness, right? I'm all about showing, not just telling. So we keep talking about unique, 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 and we talked about doing a survey. Can you give me another example of how can someone find their uniqueness, even though they're maybe doing something that is a very saturated market?
Sure. So, I mean, there are a lot of companies that sell Apple computers, and Apple doesn't like people selling their products within 5% of the MSRP. So, it really makes it so that where you shop for a computer, it really depends on what you're looking for. Some people like the retail experience, so they do Best Buy. That's their USP, that we built a place where people could drive to, go inside, test it out, play with it, and then take it home. There are places like Mac Mall that I'm not sure if they still do this, but one of the things they did was bundle. So we can't sell it less than, say, $29.95. But what we can do is throw in some free software, free overnight shipping, and some additional things. And that's like their USP and how they stand out. And another company might come through and say, hey, we'll give you a free, it used to be iPod, but now it might be something else that they throw in that's more hardware oriented rather than software. And so, what is it that you're doing that is different from your competitor? And take an audit. Is it the shipping capability that you have? I had a guy who did commercial seals and gaskets for lots of different equipment. And his USP is I can custom make any seal within 24 hours. And he got a call from an oil rig that was in the water off of Texas. And they said, we need this seal. And it was a monster, huge seal. And he says, yeah, I can have that for you in 12 hours. And they said, okay, we will have a helicopter there in 6 hours waiting for it. And he said I only charged him like $1,400 for it, and he says yet I know they spent like $20,000-$30,000 going helicopter to helicopter all the way up to Illinois where he was located, and to them it was very valuable. We ran with that story, and it got picked up. People really resonated with the journey in this case of, here I am with solving a problem very quickly. And for the oil rig that was closed down, it was losing six figures a day. So getting that seal replaced with someone who could do it immediately meant a huge difference to them. And that was what he was doing that was unique. Is there something that you're doing that's a little bit different in your marketplace? It could be if you're a local business. Is it like, do you have a special relationship with the community? Do you do something for after school? Could you do something that would resonate with your local community? And I always encourage people to go after local media. It's the easiest media to get, and you should definitely do it yourself. It's the same way you talk about, building relationships. You do that with your local media. If you think about it, in almost every market, there's probably less than 10 people who would ever write or cover you, including TV and radio. So just find out who those 10 people are, ask for their email address, and then just communicate with them on a quarterly basis with what as you have something that's really compelling that you want to share with them. And sometimes it could just even be providing them a tip or resource that you've noticed a trend, and you're not really applicable to be plugged into that, but they'll appreciate that, so that as you communicate with them more and more, you'll become more top of mind when they are looking to plug a company into a story, and they're like, oh, what kind of company could I put here? And it's like, oh yeah, that company that reaches out to me every once in a while, this would be pretty good for them. And I think that's the reason that so many people find the same companies being recycled and used again and again in their local papers, is because they have the relationships, and they built the relationships with the local media. And I think that those are things that you can really do to at least get started. Even if you're a national e-commerce company, you're headquartered in a local market. Why not feed them as well?
Yeah, I think it's so important to nail down your story, but also, like you said, see it as a relationship because unlike a lot of the other relationships, like for example, in like dating and marriage, like you maybe date one person, but with like, being the go to expert, they will keep calling you again and again because they know that you're a dependable person. And I can't tell you the number of times people in my starter pack community, they actually started to get emails from the journalist and was like, "Hey, I'm actually working on a story about this. Do you know anyone?" Right? Because they're also looking for people. So
Sure.
I feel like PR and relationship building with the media. It's one of those things. It's only going to keep paying more and more dividends, but you just got to get used to pitching. And as I always say, is everything you want is on the other side of the send button, right? So like
Yeah.
don't be afraid to pitch. So can you tell me? So you've given me a rundown of the types of releases, using predictions and not being afraid to be wacky and not following a stringent style. Now, you've seen hundreds, thousands of press releases. What are some of the other ones that tend to do well? Let's talk about the headline actually. So, I have a certain way I like to write it, but is there any like best practices of the actual headline, the part that's in bold, big letters?
I find that the for a press release, you got to realize it's going over the wire, and it's usually feeds that are headline oriented. So I would avoid puns and the clever New York Post style headline. I can see if it was for the consumer, it might do well, but journalists want to just know, looking at the headline, that this is applicable to them, their beat, what they cover. So I think anything that sort of answers that question of, is this relevant to me, and then why? Why does this matter right now?
Yeah, I love that. So that's the headline. So for example, I'll just like for example, one of the press releases I wrote for Sigma Ratings, which is a fintech company, the world's first non-credit risk ratings agency closes 2.4 million Series seed funding. So that's kind of your like standard announcement, right? Or
Right.
it could be like, do you think that that's kind of what it should be, or should we be a little bit more creative? Or
No, I don't think you have to be very creative. I think the media responds to just that. That's very succinct. It's a very short little bit of real estate, and you've got the announcement there. It answers the questions. I think that being very creative in the headline can be a recipe for disaster, because it generally makes the press release longer and more playful, and requires more hoops for the journalist quick browsing mind to jump through and figure out before they move on.
what about the sub headline? Because I know that sometimes when it gets reposted on like a Markets Insider, some people don't have a sub headline. So how do you feel about the subheading?
I think it's an opportunity to stand out. It's another place that's usually at the very top. I like subheads. There used to be with the Newswire some syndication partners that wouldn't publish the subhead, but I think that most of them do now. And I think it's an opportunity to stand out. But is it are you standing out, is the question you should ask, because if not, move on to the first sentence and skip the subhead. So it really depends whether you have something meaningful to say there that elevates the headline, and gets you moving farther down the page.
Yeah, I agree. I usually feel like the headline, you don't want to be too creative because you want them to quickly scan what it is. So if you're announcing, if you're launching, and for me, the subheadline, it just adds a little bit more color to what it is by combining X, Y, and Z. They're doing X, Y, and Z. So let's move on to the first sentence. A lot of press releases have the city and the date. So can you tell me about how do we know what city? Because what if I'm headquartered here, but I work remotely?
There are no rules. So you'll see a lot of authors will pick New York, just because it's the publishing capital for a lot of people, regardless of where they're located. But generally, it's where someone is headquartered or located, or the major metro nearest to them. But that being said, it doesn't have to be. And it really is up to you as to what you feel most comfortable. If, for example, you're working on something that's more Hollywood related, and you're based in the southeast, but you would prefer a Los Angeles headline or something like that, feel free to use it. No one's going to call you out for it. It really is just sort of voluntarily put there, and it's a harbinger of an older system that it's just still respected.
Yeah. And then so let's say like New York, comma, and then the date. So is that date just the date that the press releases go
It
live?
is, and generally it's injected by the newswire so that it's not modifiable. Because we get people panicky saying, "I uploaded the release to you, but it's got the wrong date," and it's like, well, it doesn't matter. We take it out because the newswire injects the date in there.
I love it. And so let's keep going. So I usually what I do is I hyperlink so it's like New York, July, whatever, and then the name of the company, I hyperlink it, and then I kind of reiterate what I'm saying in the headline. Is that good practice?
I think that rather than reiterate, I feel like I would acknowledge the headline, but start building it out to say more, and
Hmm.
so that it really leads the person. Because I don't want it to be a complete redraft of the headline, but uh,
Yeah.
introduce more, be more specific.
Great. Yeah. So, for example, the one I wrote for Sigma, it's like the world's first, non-credit risk agency announced it closed this money to support their goal of becoming the ratings company of the future. Right. So, is that
Sure.
kind of what you mean by? And then,
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
then let's keep going. We want to keep it short because usually, how many words is the ideal press release?
I'd say 400 to 500 words is pretty typical for most releases. I've had some that are longer and they needed to be longer because they were, providing a lot of technical information that they didn't want to send people to a page on their website, but they wanted to incorporate some of the stuff that they just knew journalists were going to want to know. But most releases are between 400 and 500 words.
Which is not very much if that includes the about section. I mean, that's like 3 paragraphs.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be a lot. I think that you want to leave the article writing to the journalists, but you do want to have enough of the strong details that they can develop the article themselves without contacting you. Journalists are often shy, busy people, and they really appreciate that if not everything is in the press release, that they can look at your website and look at your about section or your newsroom and flesh out stuff without having to call you or email you to try and get some answers.
Yeah, I love it. And I love that's why you charge like every newswire charges more if you go over a certain amount because no one's reading it. No one's
Right.
reading
Yeah.
past that.
It used to
So okay.
be that they were paying per word. It was sort of like the teletype system, but they've kept it in place mostly because they are worried that the press releases will get longer, and I know they will. If it's unlimited words, people are just going to be more verbose and not succinct, and that's one of the biggest pet peeves of journalists is that they read unnecessarily long press releases that just don't
Yep.
get to the point.
And that shows that you're really a novice because it takes a lot more work to really define your messaging and be concise. And so the shorter it is, actually, the more skilled I think it is. Okay, so we talked about the headline, we talked about subheadline. What do you recommend us put in the first paragraph?
I think that you want to just build on what your announcement is and really position what that announcement is and why it's relevant.
Mm,
I think that your subsequent paragraphs are generally just more supporting paragraphs. They might go into a little bit more detail about something. Those are opportunities to put a quote in there, usually one or two sentences that are, again, is just really magical language that's said in a way that can't be easily paraphrased. So that, if someone was writing a story, if they took that quote out, it would be a real loss to the story. And so, it does the quote stand out. And then usually there's an about section. You can usually recycle those in all the press releases. And it's usually about the organization or about a person if it's a speaker or author or something like that.
where would you put a data point?
Oh, a data point, I would try to get that in the first paragraph if I could, right after the first sentence or two. I would try to get numbers, data points, because the media loves numbers. I mean, they love stats, they love data. And so if you have data points and numbers, I try to get them in the first paragraph if it makes sense. If it doesn't, then I would put it right front and center of the second paragraph. You're just sort of looking as to making it all work. And sometimes, these hard, fast rules of having it in the first paragraph, maybe it doesn't make sense. So you have to move it to the second But I would try to get it higher on the page as much as you can, because I think that numbers are things that journalists respond to. If you've done the research and you've got the data points, they're going to appreciate it, and it's going to make you stand out.
Yeah, I really think the first paragraph is setting the stage on what this new reality that we live in, and then the data point obviously further supports that. So then my next question is, does it have to be your own proprietary data, or can it be something from like a
No,
Accenture or Gartner?
it could be public data. You don't want
Okay.
to hide it, but so many people will publish that. According to X, Y, and Z, 97% of all homeowners don't carry earthquake insurance unless they're located in a fault zone, and here's why that's important. And so what you're doing is you're producing public data, but you've packaged it with your content of why this is an important thing. And the importance isn't that the 97%, you're not taking ownership of that, but you're acknowledging that. But despite this number, this is the problem, and this is what the
Yes.
press release is addressing and playing to. So it can work really well there.
Yeah, so set the stage, and then what I usually like to do is give a strategic quote by the CEO. What if I have more than one? What if a company has two founders, like three founders?
I say it tends to look like jockeying when you have multiple quotes from different people. But that being said, sometimes it makes sense. So I have seen personnel releases which do well because a company got an industry veteran who may be out of retirement that everybody knew. And so this is a really big deal. And he stepped on and he's now the VP of marketing or something in the business or business development. And so you've got the CEO talking about it, and then you might have the HR person addressing it as well. I think that that's appropriate, but I think that
Yeah.
just to have two founders in as quotes just for the sake of having it, it can be tricky. I think if you want to do it well, I would have them sort of um, almost like they're talking to each other, so that one person is saying something and another person's elaborating on it. I think that that's a place where if you were sort of jockeying the two and you really wanted to include it, that's a place where you could make it work.
Yeah.
But it is tricky. I think it's one of those things, just like having a shorter press release. To do it well, you have to have be a little more artful with it.
Exactly, because you're competing with their limited attention every single line, right? So every line needs to be more compelling. I have written a couple press releases for partnerships. So, for example, one of the small digital banks I worked with years ago, they went on to raise like $50 million. But when I just started working with them, they won an award by Visa. And so we had the spokesperson of Visa give a quote, and that really gave them that kind of industry authority. So that's one way that I would actually allow two quotes. But I do agree with you. I think one quote is more than enough, and you want to make sure that quote paints a very strategic picture of like why you're in a position to solve something. Maybe it's a quote that's a data point. So let's talk about
Sure.
wrapping up the press release. What should the last paragraph, not the about section, but how should, like, what tone should it end with?
I recommend that you send people to relevant pages if you have more data. And so a lot of times you could say, if you're announcing a product towards the end and you're wrapping it up, if you want to review all the technical specs and things like that, you can send them to a product page through a URL or something like that. I think that you want it to come to wrapping it up to be like open. And I think that ideally journalists want all the information in one place, but with a press release, you're not always going to be able to get that there. So if you have any resources, you would send them there. But also you could make an appeal to that if you want to schedule an interview with the CEO or founder or the lead developer of this product, please contact us for more information. There's lots of different approaches to it, but I like being open, and that's a place where you can get to not quite a call to action, but pretty close to one. Where if you have a white paper, that would be a good place to sort of position it, towards the end as well.
Yeah, one way is, like for a product demo or click here, especially if it's like a software. Another way
Sure.
I've done the ending is looking ahead, giving people something to be excited about. So in the next 6 months, this company plans to roll out these features, right? That's another way to end it.
Yeah, that's a really great thing to point out, to sort of do it with the idea of the future in mind.
So let's say now we have the press release. We've walked every like sentence by sentence, how to write it. Then what happens next in terms of using this press release to get on the radars of journalists before you just kind of put it out there on the newswire?
Right. So I would say that if you do have media that you've worked with in the past, or you're open to reaching out to, you could, create your own, uh, you know, top list of places that you would like to get published, and you could offer them an exclusive, and sort of go down the line, and see what happens. And once that happens, you can then send the release out over the wire. A lot of the clients that we deal with don't do the exclusive route. They just don't have the time, or the expertise to do that. So it's not something that they generally do. So they just hit send on e-releases, and we send the release out for them scheduled in the future. And that's one approach to do it. But I love the idea of cultivating your own contacts and offering some exclusivity, because it doesn't hurt to ask. And if they don't, then you can move forward.
Yeah, and you have one chance to announce, especially if it's about your launch. You want to make sure that you've used that to get conversations going because once you put it on the newswire, like 3 months pass, you can't really pitch it as an exclusive anymore. It's kind of
Right.
past news, right?
Right, it is. And you don't want to recycle old releases and old content. It's something we see all too often at e-releases. And so I always tell people that I'm certain that you could come up with something that's more relevant than you know issuing a press release that didn't work a few months ago, or didn't live up to your expectations. And I've been challenged in the past saying, "Oh no, it did really well. That's why we want to do it." And I'm like, "Well, what could you announce, or what could you put in a press release that you feel would scratch a similar itch with the media without saying the same thing again?" And it takes a little bit of effort to get to it, but it's rewarding once you do it, because those are the things that generally do well. If you can sort of if you've had success once, you can often replicate it by just differentiating and doing slight little pivots of what you're announcing.
Yeah, I always say the press release is great for SEO. It's going to be indexed on Google. It's going to be there for decades, giving you that SEO backlink, but it does not replace that relationship. And so use it, right? And that brings me to my two last questions is a lot of people ask me about logos, photos, videos. What are your thoughts about like putting something in the actual press release versus just hyperlinking it to a page?
Right. So when we issue over the wire, it's sent as separate collateral. So if you embed it in Microsoft Word, it's taken out. So you'll need to have the images separate to upload. Logos, they're okay, but I think photos are a great place to stand out. If you have a photo or infographic or something that's really compelling image wise, it does really well. There is a lot of online news outlets. And one of the things that they know is there is a progression in the audience where people are moving more visually. And eventually we'll get to video being probably the main type of news consumption, but we're not there yet in respect to most content and things like that. But they love having images, and so photos that showcase the product, or real people using the product, they do really well. Candid shots work extremely well and get picked up all the time. Stuff that looks like it's clip art doesn't really translate very well. So and the same thing with product pictures. So many people take product pictures and they're stale. There's nothing in the background. It's just it's a highly produced piece. And I think that you'll find that you do really well if you just have your product in real world situations. And I think the media responds to those types of photos, and they get used quite a bit.
Yeah, I do love infographics. I mean, there's a whole industry about like data visualization. And you talked earlier in the first segment of this about doing a simple survey. So it could be like a very small, like it could be 10 people that you survey. You can still turn that into a beautiful infographic that's really going to connect the dots. So I really do. And I also think if you're in like beauty, or wellness, or let's say if you published a book and that's a visual like food recipe, then yeah, you're going to want to put, a sample of that. But I know it costs money, right? Because every word, every thing that you embed, there's an extra charge. So there is a
Right.
creative way they can hyperlink and get around
Right.
paying for
So you can include images on the wire at no charge, but if you want them embedded, and what they mean by embedding is some of their downline syndication partners will embed them on their website. I don't recommend paying the embedding fee unless you just have a nice budget and you're willing to spend it, because it didn't help you get media pickup, because the journalists who log into PR Newswire or get the wire through news feeds in the newsroom, they're going to see the images, whether they're embedded or not. You're just paying for something that just looks more visually interesting on the syndicated part. And, we haven't really gone into that, but syndication is, I feel like a really big scam that has just really messed up the industry for a long period and makes it very confusing for people. When you pay to have a release issued over the wire, it automatically appears on Yahoo Finance and various websites they call syndication partners. And in the early 2000s, it was like a Cold War where everybody was trying to have the biggest list of syndication partners. And so if you issued a press release, it could appear on over 300 different websites. And, Google after a while said, "Hey, we don't want to give SEO credit for this. So these are best practices. No follow links should be included. They should be tagged as press releases, so that generally not all of these media pickups will be included in Google News and things like that." So it's settled down quite a bit, but there are a lot of people who feel that the number of sites that automatically pick up the release after the release goes out is the goal. And that's not. I mean, the goal is earned media. That article in the New York Times or a certain magazine that's really relevant for you, that's the real goal, and that's the real magic that happens with PR. And the syndication part of it is really not that important. So I wouldn't pay to embed just to make your syndication links look prettier by having the images embedded on certain websites.
Yeah, I love how you validated that it does not replace you pitching and building that relationship, because that's a journalist is not just going to republish your press release. They're going to want to get on the phone with you to make sure your name is spelled right. And that's part of why they have integrity as journalists, right? They need to do their due
Sure.
diligence. And that leads me to my last question is, a lot of people have no idea. I mean, in terms of which newswire to choose, there's so many different prices and they make it very complex. So, can you just tell us your point of view on how a small business can choose what's the right distribution for them?
Well, I think if you're a small business or entrepreneur or startup, e-releases is a great way to go, because PR Newswire charges over $1,000 for a 500 word press release. Through us, it's as little as $200 to $400 for the same press release going out nationally. Um, and it's interesting that we're able to offer that, and it's because we're serving an industry that the newswire hadn't traditionally reached out to or served. And so we talked for a really long time before we started working together, and I addressed the fact that my customers couldn't afford to pay $1,000 plus to move a press release, but there was value to going over a wire. And so we did sort of win-win things where I make sure that I'm not recruiting customers that would be better sent directly to the wire. So that's why I generally work with really small businesses that are doing 3 or 4 releases a year on average. And another thing is looking at the scheduling. Most people are used to going directly to a wire and picking their time when the release goes out, but ours are default sent before 9 a.m. next business day. And that allows their editorial team overnight, which generally doesn't have much to do, to set up our releases for us. So we're not costing them additional labor. And so that real relationship that we have allows small businesses and entrepreneurs and startups to get access to the wire nationally without paying anything close to the retail rate. And I see that as like a huge win-win. Business Wire is a really great wire. I feel it's right there with PR Newswire, but you would never send to both. And so I think that getting PR Newswire at a really great rate through e-releases is really a great option for people, and we're really proud to help small businesses and entrepreneurs by offering that.
Now, this might be kind of a question that's kind of obvious for you, but for a lot of our audience, the next question is, well, why can't I just approach the wire directly?
You can. They have salespeople, and on average, each customer under a salesperson represents 30,000 a year in revenue. If you're not willing to outlay $30,000 a year with them, it's not worth their salespeople's time and energy. So, and again, they're just going to give you the public rate of $1,100, $1,200 for 500, 600 word press release. They're not going to discount it just because you approach them.
Yeah.
They have no problem with like Fortune 500 companies spending 50, 60,000 or more a year with them, and so they're not looking to cut e-releases out and try to get the small businesses that potentially could drive $600, $800 a year to them. That it allows us to provide the customer service, the support, the holding hands of these people. A lot of the small businesses we work with have never done a release, or they've never issued a release over the wire. So we sort of, walk them through that process and ground them in their expectations.
Right, I get it. So it's not really like mutually exclusive. It's just they're serving the Microsofts of the world that they have a huge PR department, whereas me and you, we are really for the small business entrepreneur. So for anyone that's interested in actually having a press release written, you can go to gloriachowpr.com/VIP. But Mickie, why don't you tell people how they can, or maybe you want to tell us that maybe you can offer a special rate for our community. And I challenge everyone to issue a press release in your lifetime just to see how it works. I mean, I think it's a really fun exercise as well in terms of getting your
Right.
messaging proper.
Right. So we have a new customer special on our website. If you look at the footer, it says new customer special. That's the best place to go. It's ereleases.com/hello. And I do recommend that anybody who's considering PR to take an audit of their business for strategic press release ideas. And I have a free masterclass that goes through that, 8 strategic ideas for building a compelling press release. And if you take that, you should walk away with 6 to 10 different ideas for your business that you could do that stands a really strong chance of getting media pickup. And that's available at ereleases.com/plan. PLAN. And again, it's completely free. You just have to sign up to get it and get access to it. And whether you use it or not, I think there's some really valuable tips in there and resources that can help you in your press release journey.
I love that. I'm gonna after this, I'm gonna put a special code that you can give to our community that I'm gonna put on in the show notes, because I do think that every business should issue at least one press release in your lifetime. It teaches you how to speak in a more official tone, in a more authoritative way, like everything we said. So we've talked about so many things, and you've dropped so many gems. I think I'm gonna make this actually a 2-part episode. The first part being what is a press release. The second one is a line by line education class on how to write it. Is there any last parting thoughts that you want to leave my audience with?
I think that the thing to know is that so many people have success with PR when they're approach it from an openness and a willing to try it and test it. I think that doing a PR campaign rather than just a single press release is the right approach to take. And don't be afraid to own your story and to get out there. So many people are just hesitant or don't feel they're important enough. And the thing to realize is that the media is just looking for great content, and a lot of it comes from really small companies and small people who have large ideas. And if you're willing to share those ideas, you can really go far with PR.
Thank you so much. And how can people connect with you other than just going on the e-releases website?
Right. So on the website is social media. That's my direct LinkedIn on there at ereleases.com. And LinkedIn's the best way to reach me individually. I can't say that I check every day, but I do check a couple of times a week. And I am pretty responsive to people who reach out to me there.
Thank you so, so much for doing this very thorough class, if you will, on press releases from the beginning of what it is to what it is now and how to write it. And I cannot thank you enough. So thank you so
Uh,
much for being on the show.
you're very welcome.